was just thinking of you because I was reorganizing some of the materials from our year-long program last night. And the area I was up leveling of our training had to do with clarifying roles. And I know that role clarity comes up a lot in a lot of different ways as we work with our entrepreneurial clients and as the businesses go through different stages. And that some leaders need our teaching and training on how to have responsibility for communicating about what's on their plate, how it's going, what their role actually is, and keep getting that clear even as things change. So I was wondering what you might have to share with me about role clarity and why it's mattering more in the current business environment.
Yeah, yeah. Like so many of our clients, because of the current business environment, the external factors that are really impacting, whether it's the downturn in economy, online marketing is definitely on its downslope after a really great ride of developing and growing in business as an industry. And just in general, it's one of those times in business where a lot of the way things have been operating are not getting the same results for multiple reasons. And it depends on the size of the company and where they started and where they are to. But when I think about role clarity right now, the thing that's most on mind in our working with our clients, in our program, and in our coaching and private clients is the working with change and how that role clarity and revisiting the role clarity and how important the team for the business, one, how important the team is, but then also how important how that team is operating together and building the empowerment for them to get more and more clear of their part, creating more and more safety to do their parts together and keep getting aligned moving through that change. It's tricky. It's tricky times for that. It definitely impacts a lot of the changes are coming because of the business part, but it really activates the development in the people part.
And I think it's important when we work with our clients that we're teaching them that you are supposed to have clarity on your role, on the expectations, maybe in relationship to the business picture. So, what am I really being held accountable to deliver in this role? And I was speaking with a coaching client this week who is aware that things are changing in her role, but nothing is definite yet. So she's hanging out, waiting to find out, well, what is this change in my role? What does it mean? And yeah, what does it change about what I'm supposed to be doing every day? And it's a sort of an uncomfortable place for a team member to be. But I wanted to get your opinion on this because part of what I coached around it was knowing and being empowered that she can keep inquiring to get the clarity, right? So if the meeting's not happening to get the role clarity, sometimes the team member has to be the one raising their hand again to say, I think this is important that we get aligned on the expectations for my role. When are we having that follow-up conversation? And that's okay because an individual team member having role clarity and knowing what's expected of them helps the business. It's important to the business. It's another thing if the leadership team is like, well, wait a minute, we're going to roll that out to you by September and you just have to be patient. The instance I'm talking about is a little more like something, it's clear that we're not clear on what is expected from the role now, but no further clarity has been confirmed and the calendar keeps going by. And so in the leaders I work with, empowering them to know, go ahead and ask, go ahead and get that meeting, get that clarity because it's important to the business. But what do you think?
Unless you're like an early startup phase of an entrepreneurial business, which at that time there aren't clear roles. That needs to evolve, but in the very beginning stage of an entrepreneurial business, that's not important. And so there's a couple of pieces to think about there. But once that business is starting to gain some traction and move into where the business needs some systems and processes, and there's more activity happening. There's a program to deliver, there's marketing to happen, there's operations where those functional parts of the business are starting to form. That's when you want to start building role clarity. And of course, it's a process, right? So in the beginning, it's like kind of all hands on deck. And you can still move from a stage one, stage two business where a little bit still all hands on deck. You might be helping out in marketing and program delivery and doing some of the project management in all those different ways. But all the thinking, if it's held in the what we call the top of the triangle, the lead operations person or the lead marketing person or the CEO themselves, the founder might be that person who's holding all the strategic thinking and all the how we're going to get it done and all the how is it going now thinking, like that doesn't work. It will implode at some point. And what you're talking about in that example is more of an organized restructuring versus that natural development. And either way, having role clarity developing in a timely manner is going to be super helpful, right? And so that's one piece. And absolutely, I totally agree. If you're a leader in an entrepreneurial company that's growing to the point of you're realizing, hey, like I'm doing a lot of stuff, but I'm not holding ownership of any of it. I'm not feeling the responsibility of that outcome. Yes, raise your hand because the business needs that. And proactively would be very cool. It would be impressive to say, hey, in a team meeting, I'm thinking that I could contribute at a higher level and perform more contribution into the teamwork if there was more of a role clarity where not only a level of responsibility, but a level of authority, a level of decision making or reporting even would be more clear in the expectations of my role. Team needs that. We all need that. The leader, the CEO needs that. Like, what's my part now? What's my part now? So that we can really have a good interaction. So definitely for that phase. And definitely as you're talking, Heather, and I think in your example, it sounds like an organization that's more moving through a structured restructure. And even then, hey, I'm feeling the impact in my role of this uncertainty. Not only is it uncomfortable, yep, that's okay. We know that. But also you need to surface how it's impacting so that a restructure is a process. Maybe they're not sharing enough information in that process for the team to be functioning while they're going through a restructure. Does that make sense?
Yes. And there was something you spoke to, which I felt was related to sometimes when roles get title changes because it communicates to the rest of the team this level of responsibility that I'm now carrying. So if I'm the director of a department, that could be really important for my other team members to understand the level of responsibility I'm holding. It's kind of like sometimes we hear inside companies that people don't know who to go to for what, and people don't know. Well, a lot of people give their opinion on this thing, but who has more of the deciding vote, right? And that is really can be communicated through people having the proper role titles and positions, and the positions making sense in relationship to one another. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's why we call it a functional organizational chart, not a, how we do it organizational chart. We were just working with a client yesterday, comes to mind, because it's a new client for us. And so when we meet to start an engagement with a company, we do what we kind of call a boot camp. It's like when we listen a lot and ask, like, who are you? How do you operate? Tell us about where your business is at. Give us some history. Tell us where you want to go. And we just really receive a lot of information. And so as we were listening and writing that out, it was like Amanda does this, this, and this, and Joe does this, this, and this. And we were making a chart, but that's a people chart, right? And they don't have the titles and the leadership yet. So we made a point to say in that process, like what we're going to do is turn this into a functional org chart that talks about the functions of the business. And those usually are, as the entrepreneurial business grows, it's usually like production, marketing, there might be a sales channel, the acquisition of the clients, or that's bundled right into traffic and conversion in your marketing area. Sometimes it has its own little area depending on the type of ways that people sell in their business, right? Then you have centrally the operations, that's your HR, your legal, your financial, your systems and processes, your main overall project management. Then you have your program delivery. It's like that. The rest of that part is then like what we promised to do and how we're doing it, and the client journey and the retention in the clients, and being sure we're satisfying what we have promised and even beyond to keep our clients getting the best from us. So it might be coaching teams and client service and all of those type of things, as well as the trainings and deliveries themselves. So all of those functional areas start getting mapped out, and then you put the people in those spots wherever they are, and even if they are all over, as I had said earlier. So that part is a little bit of a mindset shift, for people to start seeing the business structure and how the people are performing in that. And then absolutely, the level of title can vary in the entrepreneurial teams and companies a little bit more than maybe in the corporate structure that has a little more unification between companies. But in general, every level of someone's role is super valuable to achieve the outcomes of the business, right? But we do have a functional level of team members, and then we have managers, and that's the level that generally starts forming the cross-functional thinking. So those leaders of managers of different functional areas form a cross-functional thinking and collaborating team. And that generally, they're like, I think of that group as the heart of the business, like really the center of how we get our outcomes. They're responsible for taking the projects come out of the strategic plan and executing the day-to-day work that happens to make those goals. And then if you move to a next level, you have directors and VPs, and then the C-suite, COO or chief of staff or whatever. Once you're moving past that manager level, there's also an element of responsibility for the business itself. What's the profitability of a director of programs? Not only is responsible for the cross-functional part, for the outcomes of what we promised, but starts also holding authority, which also means they might have more information. So Heather, what you were talking about, like who's the person that we're structuring the communication line, is because that person not only has responsibility and authority, they generally might also have the most up-to-date and clear, or the history information. So that's why we want to recognize those different levels mean something, I think is what you're going for. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, and the role title communicates something, and like to just what you just said, in this particular instance that I had in mind, it actually clarified what meetings this person should be in at this point in time in the organization, right? Which always has to be reevaluated, not every moment, but as the company grows, it needs to be reevaluated, right? And so this leader's title needed to change to communicate to people that level of responsibility, but it also would help them assess, do we have this person with this expertise in the meetings where we're making decisions where that expertise like needs to be in the room? So it's interesting how all of this is intertwined and very important. And I wanted to go back to also what you were explaining about the functional org chart and how you first define, if we had a blank piece of paper here, put buckets up for the different functional things that happen within the business. And then we put our team members' names in those boxes. And for example, my name, Heather, might be in multiple boxes across different functional areas, right? And that sort of tells a story of the responsibilities I'm holding, who I'm working with in these areas. It should show in that functional org chart who is holding that main responsibility, right? And it also made me think of, when you were talking through that for everyone, about one of the first times I learned the real power of a functional org chart was in coaching someone. And they did that exercise of creating a functional org chart along with their CEO. And their CEO said, go ahead and put your name in all the places that you hold a major responsibility. And this team member's name was everywhere. And it was a moment that they could laugh together, like, oh, because it had been unclear exactly what this person's role was. And it was kind of like, of course, because this person is literally everywhere, like trying to do all the things. And we always need those types of people in earlier entrepreneurial stages of business. But then as the business grows, it has to get dialed in more so that hopefully we're using each person for their strongest expertise to get the most value, or at least that's how I think about it. And in this instance, that CEO and the leader were able to look at the chart and go, I appreciate that you're in all the things, but I actually want to free you up to have other people take some of these other responsibilities, like keeping our CRM up to date and cleaned, because you don't need to do that. You're a brilliant creator and marketing mind. I want you spending your time, the majority, thinking over here. And that really came through the process of creating, birthing a functional org chart that represented the company at that moment in time. And I know that this is kind of big, that companies right now are doing a lot of restructures, as it would make sense, right? In tighter financial times, we have to take a closer look at everything and how is it operating, and maybe we do things a certain way because that's how it happened, but are we actually doing them in the ways that make the most sense? Right. And so a lot of people are looking at their functional org charts with you.
Very much. Like, we're definitely working with a lot of companies right now for multiple reasons, but the biggest reason, things have changed, right? And so internal change needs to happen when the external environment is changing, and the results you're getting and the way you're doing it needs to change along with all the other change. And a lot of times that can look like, I have so many thoughts to go in a couple different directions here, but so I'll try to follow my thoughts a little bit. But one of them that just popped into my head is, a lot of times when we meet people, it's at the level of leadership in change that is like crisis to crisis to crisis. Let's fix this. Oh no, now this is happening, right? And we want to get to another level of being able to really think and navigate through change. That's that next level of being able to have the emotional endurance that when change is happening and results aren't working, and how it just, you said something earlier, Heather, like, well, that's kind of just how it just landed. That's not quite what you said, but that's what you were saying, right? It's just like, this naturally happened. And you reach those moments where you want to take a look at what's naturally happened and see if it makes sense. And that's that place where you want to get that functional picture first, as you said, without the people, because that's, what does the business need? What functions need to happen based on what we're doing, what we're going for, right? From our marketing strategy to our delivery promises and programs, and how we do that, that defines the actions in the different areas. Then it's not uncommon to have people be like, whoa, okay, we've been operating in, everybody helping and where it needs to happen, when it needs to happen. We're working particularly with a company right now, so we've been taking them through that. I'm thinking of one particular where the team cohesion of getting things done is excellent. They work together great, and they're working all over the company based on, oh, we're doing this right now, we're doing that right now, on Wednesday we're doing this right now. But as we started looking at and developing the functional picture, it was almost as dramatic as you're talking about with that CEO and their leader. It's just like, oh, and you can kind of see where you want to lean into, It's like, yes, I'm doing a lot of work in customer service, but where I could contribute even more, is if I was leading in the marketing area and moved away from that piece. And so that's when you start putting the people into that for working through a reorg or a new organization of a team. And so you can see some of it naturally happens, as in that case with that CEO seeing like, well, I see great value when you're strategically sharing in marketing, and I want more of that too. So it becomes a process. Now, it's interesting. I want to go back really quick to the team meeting part, which is so important in the role clarity piece. And it's like that team member that you were mentioning. She's like, when am I going to know the change? Because I'm kind of in limbo here, right? What you have to realize is that all this back end process needs to happen. Because as soon as you start structuring those role clarity, absolutely you want to take a look at your team meetings. And who should be there for the most productive meetings is going to start depending on their levels of responsibility, the levels of information they carry, what resource they are, and what are those expectations that they're one, needing to deliver, and two, they're processing and thinking about, or they're in the action. And I love to say the best information is where the action is, right? So who needs to be in this conversation? Even if we're not making a decision, you might need different people functioning in a team meeting for the best collaborative thinking, even if it's going to then get, which is great, brought up to the CEO who's really going to make the decision, but certainly can't, not in today's environment, not at the stage of businesses that we are at today. The CEO doesn't have enough information to make all the best strategic and creative and innovative decisions. Not now, not anymore. And that's not going to change. That's only going to keep going that way.
Yeah, and another thing that's about this meeting assessment situation is that it's kind of funny, but sometimes the people with the expertise of how to do a certain thing aren't in the meeting when we're deciding like how should we solve this problem, and it crosses over into this area. And you would think, well, we should have some people in here that know what it takes to actually like make that happen, because it would be part of knowing whether a solution we come up with is actually going to work or not. But sometimes that thinking doesn't occur, and leadership is making decisions without the expertise of the people who have to do the doing of it in the room, and they're missing some valuable information. They might have a really good meeting, decide on an approach that once it gets taken to the team that has to execute it, it's like, well, that won't work. We work within the software that won't let us do that, or something like that. And so that's why I also think it's really important to think, do we have the right thinking in the room around this meeting table, whether we're virtual or in person? I think about it like for each meeting, are all the right people in the seats that have the thinking that we need to think around these topics or these problems that generally get brought up or solved within this meeting.
Yeah, I'm thinking of an example of a manager in a rather large entrepreneurial company that we work with. And he's the manager in developing the app, right? And he came into coaching and he's just like, I'm always in the meetings after they've made the decisions. How can I get on the other end of that when they're in the process, right? Is exactly what you're talking about. And that was brilliant for him. And it's kind of like, I'm sitting there and I have all this thinking that I wasn't able to contribute. Now I'm just dealing with whatever they decided because it's already moved forward. And now I'm being brought in. And that was such a great point to bring to the leadership to be like, oh, wait a minute. Where can we bring him and his collaborative thinking in at a better spot?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, and one that if people are watching this conversation, this podcast episode, or what have you, they might think, of course, people think of that. But I would say probably in every company, you could find a meeting where we're leaving some important people out of the conversation. because we get our meetings dialed in, and then the company grows and the business needs grow and shift, and all of this is like a shifting, changing picture that needs to be revisited again and again for how we make the best use of the time and the human resources within the organization.
Yeah, yeah. And I was thinking in this example I was bringing forward, even going back to the example you had earlier, where yes, it's your role and your responsibility to raise your hand if you're in the process of change and it's impacting your daily performance, like bring it to the table. In the same way this leader was bringing to the table, like nobody else knew his thinking and his experience, right? So if he didn't surface that, that would be a loss, really. Right now, that brought the pause to, hey, yeah, and of course it continues, right? Like, don't assume. Another example is a leader moving through process of change, and her daily work was being impacted because there was a lot of waiting, and assuming they're really focused on her part and the part that's impacting her daily work, when it was a big change movement through the organization. And I did coach her, and she did step forward to be like, hey, I'm just checking in. Here's what I'm doing now, and I'm feeling a little on a pause. I'm fine with the pause if it's needed, but I just want to know if there's any next step I could be focusing on. Happy to be in the process, but just here's where it's impacting this moment. And it was a really good thing to do that, because there were so many areas of change being talked about and thought about on other leadership levels, that it was important for her to bring that forward, to just be like, oh, okay, let's check in on that part and see how we can move something a little bit forward for the impact it's having, right? And so process of change is so important, and it can be a little change or a big change. But that role clarity is so important, in that even if you're one of the leaders who is developing and leading the change, right? Because you need that confidence of the process you're in, the collaborative thinking to bring it forward. And sometimes that's why it takes a little longer on the back end. You want to get to the place, bring in consultants, people like ourselves who work with lots of people and have an expertise about working with teams through change. Do your own collaborative thinking within the organization and get to a place that you're confident enough that you can hold some safety by guiding the team through the steps of the process and being able to reassure and reevaluate through that process. But holding that the level of authority that you have within the change movement and continuing to revisit and keep that confidence is going to help all levels of team that are impacted through that process. And usually the change is happening while everything else is happening too, right? There's still marketing, there's still delivery, there's all life is still happening. People are going on vacations while you're moving through a big change. So that's important. I guess I'm throwing in a little bit of the thoughts of how do we create more and more safety for one another in that process of change.
I hear that you're telling people to advocate for how it's going for them in their role, which we is often eye-opening for team members to think about, because they really are, like you said, assuming maybe that people know. They know what's delegated to me. They know what's projects. They know what they're checking up on me about, right? So they know what's on my plate. They know how it's going. But the fact of the matter is, just like in anywhere else in life, assumptions don't work. And the team members really do have to be the ones to advocate and share what's going on, what's on their plate, if there's a better way to use them or their expertise. And I've been having these situations recently, Barbara, in coaching, where I have to help leaders recognize that just because you have this job title and you know your resume and the expertise that goes into that, do not assume that other people in the company really know what that expertise entails, because they don't know, say, your specialty, and they are not thinking of everything it entails. In a way that creates a gap. Like, go ahead and paint the picture of, I actually do have expertise in this area. This is something I did in a previous role, And now it's seeming like something I could help this organization with. Don't assume because people aren't asking that they should know because it's clearly communicated in your resume or your role title or something, because they just don't. And in general, I think if we do more communicating about how it's really going right now in my role and what's the best use of me, then we'll be actually serving the overall success in the business. And that's the part that people should have more confidence in.
Right. And what comes to my mind is that very important process of performing coaching plans. And that is a place, if, and we highly recommend that teams not only get role clarity and hire well, onboard and train and get people in those clear roles well, work on the team organization for how we communicate, how we report throughout, whether it's up, down, or across within the organization from our roles. But then we also want people to be able to have a structured way that they can have that conversation you're talking about. Certainly they can raise their hand to their supervisor or the next person that they report to, but we also want to create the structure within the organization to be watching that and communicating on a regular basis. One, so we can recognize and appreciate, and two, so that that collaborative conversation can happen and where you're seeing certain things. I'm thinking of an example of another organization we work with. One of the people I'm coaching does the dashboards. And a lot of the dashboards are created by request, right, from different departments of the organization. And then he and his team are working in getting the data from the different ways and creating a presentation and seeing, here's the numbers that are coming, here's how you can work with these numbers, where they come from, and does this work? And they create an alliance. While his team is doing that, they're like so deep in the data that sometimes they're looking and saying, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, and up until recently, that was just an oh while they were doing their role. And then now what we're talking about is being like, I have some thinking to share, something I've noticed. I wonder if you'd want us to track this and do some reporting. Here's something we're seeing while we're working on these other pieces. And it's been an advancement. That role is a role that now is being invited to more meetings, being like, oh, wait a minute, that thinking and that stuff that's happening while you're doing this stuff is like really important. Maybe we could have you at this level of a meeting. So it has advanced almost what you're saying, Heather, in the way that somebody has knowledge, whether it's internally seeing trends or numbers, like in that case, or past experience. I've done a project similar to this. Maybe it'd be helpful if I can contribute in this planning or even in the execution of our new program. And here's what I think I can contribute, really making those presentations. But I'll go back to, I think systems and processes and structures are so, so important. So not only examining how you do team meetings, but how are we going to keep staying informed of the experience of our team and our leaders and keep them developing along with the company, right? Our greatest asset as a business is our team. The business needs the team to be functioning and getting those outcomes. So that's just a whole nother process to be sure that really role clarity and developing in that role for clarity as things change and grow. You want to retain your best talent, then you want to be working with them and having that, it's the same as when we talk about delegation being a two-way street. Development and growth is really a two-way conversation. It's not waiting for others to notice and invite. It's actually also bringing your thinking forward.
All right. Well, thank you. I think hopefully people are inspired to take out a piece of paper and see or pull out that org chart, right? I was thinking our overall maybe message would be that whether you have a functional org chart or not, if you don't, let's get you crafting one. If you do, it's not something you create and then put away. It's a living document, and we definitely want to communicate that and in how Barbara shared, the way it connects to so many other things within how the company operates and how the team develops for getting the best results, then we want you to know how important this functional org chart is as a living, breathing document and representation of how your team operates. So,
If you don't have a functional org chart, it's a game changer. It definitely will brighten everything up and move you forward. It's a needle mover for sure. So get those drafts out and let's take a look at what's happening in your business.